Now, detonate the reality bomb!
I will build a great, great wall.
Some alien race to come down and threaten us.
Is the singularity near?
The truth is out there.
The military-industrial complex.
The seven mountains of the influencers of culture.
To be as gods, you know.
Change has come to America.
Catapult of propaganda.
From a secure location on top of the ridge in the heart of the beautiful Missouri Ozarks, this is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
President Trump's election was either the greatest thing to happen in America for generations or a complete and utter disaster. And the title of the book we'll be discussing is based on the assumption by many of the left persuasion that that is exactly what it was. The book, Trumpocalypse, The End Times President, A Battle Against the Globalist Elite, and the Countdown to Armageddon. We welcome to A View from the Bunker the co-authors, best-selling authors of the book, The Babylon Code, Troy Anderson and Paul McGuire. Gentlemen, welcome.
Great to be here.
It's nice to have you guys here in the Ozarks again. It's been, about a year and a half since we talked about your book, the previous book?
Yeah, we came out here about 2 years ago.
And the new book, the title, Trumpocalypse, is obviously going to be a bit of a lightning rod.
I think so.
Brilliant title. I mean, I wish we'd thought of it first. But the subject, of course, just the election of Donald Trump is controversial enough. Most major media still hasn't figured out that Donald Trump is basically toying with them. I mean, his use of social media has been fantastic. What was it about you two, after coming off the writing of the book, The Babylon Code, and dealing with Bible prophecy? Paul, as somebody who's been writing and talking about Bible prophecy for a long time, what was it that led you two to partner up again and take on the what Donald Trump's election means to America and means to Christians?
Well, like everybody, we were fascinated by the whole election process and amazed that he won, because we were all watching television and they definitively told us Trump had lost, and then he's president. And we saw the enthusiasm, and like many of your listeners, we knew that those auditoriums that he was speaking to were packed with 10, 30, 40,000 people at a time. Mm-hmm. And like you said, Trump is a master. He was outsmarting them the entire time. And but we also recognize that Donald Trump, we believe that Donald Trump that God is using him in a powerful way. And Donald Trump as president is really a reprieve from God to our America, which we believe is at the point of judgment. But through Donald Trump, an imperfect man, we believe that if we will pray and repent, God is giving us an opportunity for revival and a divine reprieve for whatever time from judgment and disaster.
So, Troy, as a Pulitzer Prize nominated journalist, how did you approach the research for this book? I mean, I know for the Babylon Code, you interviewed a lot of people, religious leaders in particular, dealing with the prophetic subject of Mystery Babylon. But this is a topic that arguably is as much political as it is prophetic. So who did you choose, and how did you approach the research for the book?
Yeah, the research we did for Trumpocalypse is similar to the Babylon Code. You know, for those who've read the Babylon Code was essentially an expose of globalism. And then, President Trump was the first president to campaign against globalism. He said Americanism, not globalism, will be our credo, was his central campaign. And so shortly after we finished writing the Babylon Code in early 2005, I kept on researching this, this link between, unfolding events and Bible prophecy. And then, he began his campaign, and we just kept on, digging into this. So it was about 2.5 years of research. And then, then he got elected. Paul got a hold of me. He felt very passionate about it and believed that, God was calling us to write a book about this, to analyze the link between the rise of his presidency and what we see unfolding in world events and Bible prophecy. And, I think the second sentence of the book quotes Noam Chomsky saying that November his election in 2016, may be the most important date in history, is what way Noam Chomsky, MIT professor, characterized Trump's election. Of course, Chomsky's concerned about, is Trump going to lead us into nuclear war? I mean, that was the big media meme, prior to the election. Hillary Clinton, used that as a campaign strategy. You can't elect Trump. He's too impulsive.
He's unstable.
Yeah. He'll lead us into nuclear war. And now, sure enough, first year of your presidency, you've got the North Korean leader threatening to attack America with nuclear missiles, and this exchange going back and forth. So, it's all very interesting the way this is all transpired.
Now, Chomsky, again, not a conservative here. So you didn't limit yourself to people who had a point of view that Christians would necessarily agree with.
Yeah. So with this book, we interviewed all kinds of faith leaders and Bible scholars. Billy Graham, one of the last interviews with Dr. Tim LaHaye, Anne Graham Lotz, Pastor Jim Garlow, Billy Crone, all kinds of faith leaders and Bible scholars, but also many secular experts. Because we interviewed professors at Princeton and Harvard. Oxford University has a Future of Humanity Institute,
right,
and they study existential risk. And they issue annual reports about the top 10 risks facing the world. Nuclear war, extreme climate change. An asteroid hits us. Artificial intelligence run amok, and one of them is a global totalitarian government. So, even your secular experts are very concerned about nuclear war and a global totalitarian government and other major threats facing us. So we put this book, analyzes all these different threats, and are we in the run up to the events that the Bible predicts will happen during the end times.
Paul, in the Babylon Code, you guys obviously dealt with the where we are prophetically and what's coming, and the work of a global elite, and you address that again in Trumpocalypse. What has been the reaction of the elites to Donald Trump's message of making America great again, America first?
Well, it's really very interesting, and it would be amusing if it wasn't so tragic. But Donald Trump has single-handedly gone against the global elite. And they own 6 globalist corporations own all the mainstream media, and the global elite own the major newspapers, and they own many of our politicians and presidents, et cetera. And they do not want to see America great again. They want to make America weak so they can bring in their planned United Nations one world government. And Trump is trying to make America great again. And they've gone ballistic and tragically, and we need to pray for our president. And there's a real spiritual message to Trumpocalypse also. We need to pray for our president, and we need to stand up for what is right, because we are convinced, and we talk about it in the book. In fact, in the book Trumpocalypse, right as we were getting ready to send it to the publisher to get it printed and final editing, we were talking with somebody, a pastor who was in the Oval Office when they were praying for Trump privately, and this particular individual had met with a very high-level member of Congress, and he pulled this pastor aside, talked to him privately, and said, listen, there is a plot to assassinate Trump. And I don't remember exactly what he said. We talk about it in the book Trumpocalypse. But there's a plot to assassinate President Trump.
Yeah, this is Rodney Howard Brown, the pastor you're talking about, right?
Yeah, and I talked to him on the phone, I guess a couple of hours or an hour after he met with the president. And I talk about the fact that, some people view Brown as controversial theologically. Well, the point is not Brown's theology. The point is his statement accurate? And everybody agrees it was accurate. And so when I was talking to him, and we include this in the book, the Secret Service were waiting to meet him outside of his office to interview him. But here's the President of the United States, being targeted for assassination, whether it's a physical hit, or by saying he's mentally ill, we got to remove him from office, or saying he has dementia, or whatever other trick. It appears up to this very second, as people are viewing this and listening to this, their goal is to take him out of office, because Christians are confused, and I don't mean this in a derogatory manner, but Christians are confused as to whether or not, is God behind Trump or whatever. But the globalist elite are totally unified in their opinion that Trump represents a threat to their global agenda. Now, if Trump represents a threat to their global agenda, why are Christians divided? I mean, they seem to see the picture clearer, and that's one of the reasons we wrote the book. We wanted to show people, for example, that in Genesis 11, God clearly states that he is against one world government. No ifs or buts about it.
Right.
And in Genesis 11, God clearly states that he is for nationalism and the independent nation state. Mm-hmm. So people say, Trump is just running around saying, make America great again. That there's a biblical reason for that, which we get into in the book.
Yeah. It is not surprising that many Christians had problems with President Trump during the election. I know we had some rather energetic discussions here at Skywatch TV in the cafeteria there over lunch, because there were some of us who were very amused, if nothing else, at how Donald Trump was stirring things up. It was pretty clear that if the global elites were upset, that he was doing something right. But there were others who were just could not get past the history of Donald Trump, some of the things that he said publicly. I've got family members who were really put off by some of the things that came out, the old audio tape, videotape of his comments about women and so forth. And I get that. But again, when the elites, when the globalists were really upset, the ones who sold us on the idea that we need to fight them over there so we don't have to fight them over here, and now here we are, 14 years later, still with troops in Iraq, and it turns out many more than we were told during the Obama administration. The Defense Department is now saying, okay, yeah, we actually got 4 times more guys there than we've been telling you. The same in Syria, to me, that was amusing, if nothing else. How do we as Christians, Troy, properly process this man who has not walked a walk that many of us would point to as exemplary? I mean, we wouldn't say to our children, when you grow up, you should be like President Trump. At least not the way he's been up until now. I mean, let's set aside what he's done over the last year and a half, couple of years, looking at his earlier years and recognizing that all of us have done things in the past that we don't want our mothers to know about. I'm there. How do we deal with this? How do we look at this guy and say, yeah, he's our man?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the central things, one of the big questions we want to answer in this book is, I mean, he's obviously a guy that's led a sinful lifestyle, and he's a billionaire. He's very brash. He's sort of bombastic. He just sort of says whatever comes to his mind.
Developed casinos, which are not exactly known as, bastions of righteousness.
And so, but if you look at, major characters in the Bible, I mean, even the great, biblical characters like Moses, he had killed a guy. Noah got drunk and naked. David committed adultery and
conspired to
kill the guy that so there's all these flawed leaders throughout the Bible, and in Daniel it does say that God deposes kings and he raises up others. And so I interviewed a Nostradamus expert, John Hogue. You'll see him on History Channel,
I have seen him
100 times. And he's probably sort of somewhat liberal, right? And because we have a chapter there sort of exploring Nostradamus's predictions in line with how they line up with biblical predictions. And I asked him about Trump, and he says, well, he goes, I view Trump just like I sort of viewed President Reagan. Is that when he gave that evil speech, is that he put enough fear in the hearts of the Russian leader at that time that it protected America. And so like Rabbi Jonathan Bernis, he sort of said the same thing, is that Trump is the guy that has the characteristics, the warrior spirit, to get the job done, to accomplish what God has sort of put him in power for. And so even though he's an imperfect man and he's, committed all kinds of sins over his life, God can use people with the right skill set, essentially, and the right, personality to to lead our country. And so that's the way we sort of explore this whole dynamic and so a way you can maybe explain this to your children. Yeah,
and as you mentioned during the interviews that we conducted on Skywatch TV, which we'll mention to viewers, will be aired in beginning January 21st, 2 weeks of interviews on Skywatch TV. You pointed out that God in the Bible apparently doesn't have a problem using pagan kings occasionally to serve his ends.
Yeah, and we try to educate people in the book Trumpocalypse, because the issue you brought about Trump's character is very important. What do you tell your children? How can you back a man who said these vulgar words or many allegations against him? And the vast majority are completely untrue, but even some of the stuff that he did do is vulgar, and it's not an example. But when you read the Bible, and we deal with this in Trumpocalypse, you see that throughout history, in the Old Testament and the New Testament, God continually uses imperfect rulers to do his will, to protect God's people. So God historically raises up imperfect men, like the king of Babylon that the prophet Daniel was dealing with. Now, the king of Babylon was no lightweight. I mean, it would be X-rated for me to describe what went on in his court and his leisure time. Okay, we couldn't even say it. Yet God used Daniel to influence the king of Babylon to lead God's people out of captivity. And then we have Pharaoh. Again, I couldn't even begin to say publicly, in terms of the occult and sexual practices, et cetera, what the Pharaoh and their court was doing. In fact, we do read about what's going on in the Old Testament. It gives us a kind of a softened description.
Sure.
But God used the Pharaoh, because of Joseph, to save God's people again. So God continually raises imperfect men up who are willing to do his will. And we shouldn't we need to learn to discern and interpret the Bible. We're not minimizing morality and decency and biblical values, but we have to be mature enough in our faith to understand when God needs to raise up a man, let's say, as Troy said, with a warrior spirit versus somebody who's being a pastor or whatever. And we have to remember that Trump is president of the United States. He's commander-in-chief. I'm not going to name names. I could name 4 presidents right now that their outward appearance and their outward so-called piety and their outward morality, they all appeared very religious and spiritual. One especially who had a prayer with Billy Graham. Very spiritual, very pious. But what these presidents did behind the scenes is 100 times more evil and offensive than the offensive remarks of Donald Trump, because those were just vulgar words. These were actions that killed people.
And sadly, as we learned from David Coe, who was an official in the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives under the George W. Bush administration, said that he came out later and said that inside the White House of George W. Bush, he was supposed to be, our president. In fact, Sharon and I, when she launched her first series of novels back in 2003 and 4, we attended a couple of the CBA conventions, the Christian Bookseller Association conventions. And there were cutouts, life-size cutouts of President Bush all over the place. Our president, the faith of our president. But behind the scenes, the officials in the White House were laughing at evangelical leaders who would come at how gullible they were, at how starstruck they were. We just tell them that we'll tell them we'll do this, we'll tell them we'll do that. And then the Christians would just line up like Charlie Brown, lining up for another kick at that football just to have Lucy pull it away at the last minute again.
Right.
And that's why I kind of laugh at this uproar that's taken place since December 6th, when President Trump officially announced we're going to move our embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Because the last 3 presidents, going back to 1992, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, all said Jerusalem is the capital, an undivided Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. So what's the big deal? President Trump just said, okay, we'll follow through. We'll do it. I mean, these last 3 guys has talked about it. We're going to do it. So, yeah, there's a difference between talking and doing.
Right.
But even in that, I think where Christians still get hung up and Troy, you can comment on this, that somehow we think in our minds that we have to elect a theologian in chief, and that Donald Trump doesn't fit that bill, and so we can't support him. I mean, what is the actual role of the president here, and how do Christians properly process our part in the political process?
Well, the president is a political leader. He's also a leader in the sense that he sets, sort of a moral tone for the nation. So,
right.
And then the Bible talks about that leaders are very important in setting a moral tone. And that's what we see the president doing here with the bills he's signing, with the actions that he's taking, with the statements that he's making. These are very important things, and so we were beginning to sort of see a shift going on in our country as we move away from this 8 years of sort of a Marxist, socialist kind of anti-God direction that we were going under the administration.
Department of Education basically threatening schools if they didn't let guys who said they were girls use the girls' locker room.
Gym
class.
Things were getting pretty crazy there. So we're seeing a move back towards more biblically kind of based rulings in society and messaging that's coming out of the White House. So that's a good thing.
And excuse me for interrupting. And if anybody wants to know why the attack on Trump is so violent psychologically and potentially physically, and why they are obsessed with destroying his character, his marriage, and taking him out by any means necessary, it's because he actually is moving forward an agenda that is biblical, like promoting Jerusalem and protecting Israel, standing for Christian values, protecting churches, protecting the church's right to preach the word and to speak out. I mean, he's actually putting his money where his mouth is. He's actually doing things that are biblical, and that's why he's aroused the hatred. They don't hate him because he's partially insane. He's very sane. He couldn't have won the election against unbeatable odds if he wasn't very sane. He's not hasty and impulsive and push the nuke button. That's why we called it Trumpocalypse. He's not going to have a Twitter fit and push the nuke button. He's very measured. That's why he's made billions of dollars. Okay, he's a very smart man. So whatever he is, he's not the things that he's being accused of.
Yeah, it's anyone who's been in sales for a while, and for whatever his reasons, God basically diverted my broadcasting career along about 1990 into about 20 years of sales, which is not my normal personality. That really pushed me out of my comfort zone. But I did learn a few things, and one of the things I learned is that when you negotiate, you never put your final offer on the table at the start of the negotiations.
Absolutely. So
when you come right out and say, we're going to do this, we're going to North Korea will be basically obliterated if you do this. So then, when he comes back with a final offer, it's going to look more measured and reasonable and allow, Kim Jong-un, or however this plays out, both sides will be able to declare a win. When he says Mexico's going to pay for the wall, well, Mexico's probably not going to pay for the wall. But when the wall gets built, Trump supporters who wanted, some security across our southern border will be happy. The Mexicans will say, we forced him to back down. It's a win-win. People who are making these claims, again, they either understand it, they're just using it for political purposes, or they don't understand the game. I'm just saying this for, Mr. Trump's supporters. When he says stuff that sounds crazy, just remember, that's his opening.
Exactly.
That's his opening bid, okay? He's going to negotiate from there. I mean, you don't go to the car dealership and say, well, I'm going to tell you that I'll pay $14,000, but I'm willing to go $18,000. You'd be stupid to do that. And President Trump is not a stupid man. So let's move into the secret plan of the globalist elite, which you get into. And this is one of the things that I really find interesting about your work, both in the Babylon Code and here in Trumpocalypse, especially in Trumpocalypse, because you're dealing with a political topic. And I'll say again, Paul, that's one of the things I really appreciated about your radio show and this was going back into the 90s, 20 years when I was coming home from my sales job working for the steel pipe company, listening to you talk politics, but do it from a biblical perspective and with a prophetic eye. And that was something you don't get much in Christian literature, Christian publishing today. So I really appreciate you guys and your work. And especially looking into the role of secret societies and the globalist elite. Start with you, Paul. The globalist elite. Why do they feel they have the right to tell us what to do, and what is their end game?
Well, the globalist elite believe at their essence that they are gods, or they're progressing to be gods. I mean, I know that sounds
divine right of kings,
right?
Sort of. Yeah,
right, exactly.
Huh.
And they believe that they are genetically superior, and that like Atlantis, that was ruled by 12 philosopher kings, and Huxley's statements, and we talk
12,
about.
huh?
Excuse me, thank you. Yes.
Yeah. No. You said 12. It just occurred to me 12. Okay, significant number. Okay. Yeah.
So as we give the background for all this in Trumpocalypse, in Huxley's words about the scientific dictatorship, they believe that this elite, they're real. They're not fictional. They're not a product of our conspiracy theory nightmares. We have impeccable documentation, credible proof, firsthand sources, original documents. There are secret societies. I hate to break it to some of the people out there. There are secret societies, and they do rule the world through an elite, a globalist elite. And I don't want to be sarcastic, but I hate to break it to some people. They do worship Lucifer, okay? And that is not, from your years of research, they are Luciferians, and they believe in bringing in this new world Luciferian order. And that's against the Bible. It's against what the book of Revelation says. And what we're really seeing, and that we tried to capture in Trumpocalypse, is a titanic clash, a titanic spiritual battle going on in America in the invisible realm between the forces of evil and the forces of good. It's nothing less than that.
Mm-hmm. And titanic is a very apt word, because it's not just meaning big, but titanic in the sense of the old gods who were thrust down to Tartarus,
right.
The Titans, i.e. the Watchers.
Interesting. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Good choice of words there. Titanic.
That's totally an accident, but I appreciate it.
No. Well, that's why the title, the working title of my forthcoming book is Last Clash of the Titans. So,
good.
Because they're coming back. They get one last shot. Troy, you write in the book about, and this was, I think, one of my favorite parts of the interview. And now we're not under no time constraints here. We don't have a 28-minute, 30-second window to fill like on Skywatch TV. Your research for Trumpocalypse reveals that these global elites are trying to implement something that they just simply call the plan. What is the plan?
Well, in occult circles, it's long been known as just the plan, capital P. And if you go on the website of Lucis Trust, which has a consultative status with the United Nations, it was originally called Lucifer Publishing when it was founded by Alice Bailey and her husband back in the early 1900s. She wrote all these books, the externalization of the hierarchy, and she was a disciple of Helena
Blavatsky,
Blavatsky, who was an occultist in the late 1800s. Who a lot of the elite have read her books.
Sure.
The Secret Destiny and ISIS,
the Secret Doctrines, ISIS Unveiled. Yeah,
right. And so, if you just go on the website of Lucis Trust today, and they used to be on the grounds of the United Nations, they lay out what the plan is. You could read literally hundreds of pages of documents where they talk about this, and essentially they worked for decades with elite government leaders and political leaders and globalists around the world to train world leaders in what their ultimate plan is, which is to create a global government, a cashless society, and some kind of new age Illuminati-based religion, sort of like a cult-based religion. And they have an indoctrination campaign of children that's been going on for decades. Common Core is part of their educational plan. You probably heard about that. In the schools. And
I can't tell you how glad I am that our daughter is out of school. But someday future grandchildren are going to have to deal with this, and we're going to have some conversations with our daughter about their education, I'm sure.
And so some interesting things. I interviewed John Fonte, who's a fellow at the I forget the name of the Hudson Institute, and he actually wrote a book on globalism from a political perspective, and he says that that they want us to willingly accept this new system. So they're trying. That's why they have this big campaign going on to get us to think of ourselves as global citizens. Mm-hmm. In fact, one of the surveys we had in the site in the book is the Global Challenges Foundation found that they surveyed 8,000 people in 8 countries, including the United States, China, India, UK, Russia. They found that 7 in 10 people in the world now support a world government authority, and 62% think of themselves as global citizens. So that this campaign has been hugely successful. Most people don't even know what's going on, and so through trade treaties, through changes in international laws, through these climate change agreements, the UN's transforming our world plan by 2030. That they're all sort of moving us into this. And what Fonte said is that, plus they've got all the big foundations on board with this. Many of the Fortune 500 corporations, many of the law schools. Just like the change in same-sex marriage ruling. They plan, according to Fonte, is to essentially change the laws until we get to the point where this will be the new global system. Everybody will just have to sort of go along with it, or you'll be outside the law. Mm-hmm. And that's how they, that's one of the ways they plan to, bring this about. And we're sort of seeing this step by step. And so going back to Alice Bailey, she wrote in one of her books, I think in the 1940s, they expected this system to be online by 2025.
Wow.
So we're somewhere in that ballpark. We're on track here.
This is one of the things that just blows me away. The role of education and the control of public education in making this a reality. In fact, there was a story that I talked about today, and this would be December 13th if you're going to go back, or 12th if you're going to go back and watch this. 12th or 13th? What day is today? 13th, yes. 13th. On Skywatch TV. The head of a prominent school of engineering here in the United States. I'm talking a major university's school of engineering, renowned for turning out top-notch engineers, actually said, this woman actually wrote, she didn't say, she wrote in an academic paper published in a peer-reviewed journal that academic rigor is perpetuating white male heterosexual privilege. A school of engineering. Now, look, engineering is science applied in useful ways. Design of buildings, roads, bridges, airplanes, ships, rockets. I mean, engineering is not a field where postmodern thought has any place. You cannot say that in engineering, truth is whatever it seems to me at the time. And my truth regarding the tensile strength of this carbon steel is different than your truth. It either is or it is not. And yet, I know a college. He teaches college now part-time, but he was a physicist by training. He actually worked in Washington, D.C., served as a science advisor to a couple of United States presidents. So, I mean, he was inside the Oval Office on a fairly regular basis back in the day. Teaching an introduction to physics course at a local community college in California, and was talking about Newton's laws and the law of gravity, and had a young man in his class actually say, "I don't believe in gravity because that's a white man's law." This is what our education system is turning out today. Now, our friend doesn't suffer fools gladly. He invited the young men up to the 4th floor roof to test his theory, for which he was sentenced to a month of sensitivity training, but he said it was worth it. But anyway, what is going on here? Why have we gone through this historic transformation? I mean, first of all, we had modernist thinking that science and the scientific dictatorship is the only means by which we can find truth, to this postmodern thinking. There is no such thing as truth. What's true for you isn't true for me. What's true for you isn't. And how is this going to facilitate this emerging global government?
Well, it's interesting that you brought up the story you brought up, and Trump understands and could articulate what you said. He wouldn't be able to frame it as academically as you framed it, but he has a gut knowledge of it, being a businessman and having to deal with the bloated government.
See, but then he's a billionaire and I'm not, so there's a trade-off there.
He gets it. And I hope, and probably most of your viewers and listeners get it because they listen to you. But for those that don't, what you're touching on is so important because what the elite think. First of all, we need to understand two fundamental principles. The elite themselves are going to train, educate themselves differently than they're going to train, educate the masses. Okay? So you have to understand, the elite are not receiving Common Core. You think their kids are receiving Common Core? Forget about it. The elite are not being told dumb things like that.
Right.
Okay? Huxley openly revealed the strategy. He said, in a truly effective scientific dictatorship, people won't even know they're in a dictatorship, and they'll learn to love their slavery. Mm-hmm. They'll be euphorically happy about living in a prison without physical bars, but they will be in a prison nonetheless. But then the elite will always educate themselves, enrich themselves, because they will be the master. The slave race, which is the rest of us, have to become stupid. We have to become scientifically dumbed down. And you blend this with Marxism. Marxism, the whole thesis of Marxism is that everything is done for the good of the state, the good of the collective. Mm-hmm. And so that means every single thing in society, anything topic you choose in society, and you just chose academics and educational vigor, okay? Well, that becomes subservient. That becomes nothing. The true goal is not whether we have academically excellent people. It's not whether or not we produce scientists and engineers. That isn't our goal. The goal is to produce subservient, compliant people who are dumbed down.
Yeah.
Because they have no intention of sharing that wealth and knowledge.
Right.
So when you have this lady, this educator who wrote what you just said, that is, if parents follow, that's insanity. But you see, she's so programmed. She is unaware of it.
And the frightening thing is that I'll name her, I'll name at least the school that she's in. Her name escapes me at the moment, but she is the head of engineering education at Purdue University. So she has a doctorate from Carnegie Mellon, which is that's a top-notch engineering school. And prior to joining Purdue University, she spent a couple of years as head of a program dealing with engineering education for the National Science Foundation. So she is not the problem. She is a symptom of the problem. The symptom, which is producing people who somehow believe that there is no such thing as empirical truth. There is no such thing as something. And I love the way Ravi Zacharias says it. Yeah. Try that in the middle of a street. It is either you or it is the bus.
Exactly.
It is not both.
Good point.
So,
yeah, I mean, the elite have literally spent billions and billions of dollars over the last several decades through different, think tanks and foundation and institute like the Tavistock Institute in Great Britain to completely, flip our Judeo-Christian society on its head. That there has been a very sophisticated, highly intelligent, complex strategies have been used, through the media, through Hollywood, through government, through education to completely change our society. And now we're watching it unfold. The same-sex marriage. What's up is down. What's right is wrong.
And it's all. How did I see this described once? We got a society right now with that is firmly planted, or the foundation of our society is firmly planted in midair.
Right. Very good point.
It is founded on nothing. I mean, this whole postmodern worldview is self-refuting. Because if somebody says there is no such thing as truth, you just respond with a simple question. Oh, really? Is that true?
Yeah, right.
Because if it is, then it means what he just said is not true. And then, basically that's where you take out the duct tape so your head doesn't explode. Which is what I did on the program. That's why I mentioned it on the December 13th program for Skywatch TV. People were looking in through the window. Why has he wrapped duct tape around his head for his thing? Because this was just it's the great endowmenting. It's unbelievable. And you're right. I think that's what's going on here. The elites aren't going to have their children educated the way our children are going to be educated if we're not careful about it. I tell you what, if our daughter was 20 years younger right now, she would so be homeschooled. Regardless of the consequences. There would have been some discussions between family members, but I don't care at this point. When we got young men saying, I'm a girl, and so I get to use the girls' locker room, and I'm going to sue you if I can't. No, our daughter would be homeschooled the next day. And loving our slavery. And this gets to something else that you cover in Trumpocalypse. Total surveillance society. We are essentially living in a virtual panopticon, which, I don't know if you saw this story a couple of months ago. Jeremy Bentham was the 18th century philosopher who created the panopticon, which was a new type of high-tech prison with a central guard tower where the guards could observe the prisoners who were in a ring, lived in cells that were arranged in a ring around the central tower so that they could be observed at any point, at any time, without their knowledge. So they became that enforced a sort of self-corrective behavior. You never know when you're being observed. You could be observed at any time or all the time, but you never know when. The idea was, according to Bentham, was that it cut down on the expense you had to pay for guards, because you could have one guard watching them all, and because the prisoners never knew when they were being observed. But it's the same in our world today. We've got a webcam right here that if the powers that be wanted to activate this webcam, we are inviting surveillance devices into our home. I mean, why anyone in their right mind would bring this Amazon Echo into their home? Alexa, listen to everything I say and report it to our global masters. But you don't have to have an Alexa device, an Echo device to do that. Your cell phone can serve that function. My iPad can serve. I use an iPad this just dawned on me. We're using the iPad as an alarm clock next to the bed, and there's a webcam on that. Ooh.
Let me just share this.
Bring some duct tape home for that one.
Let me just share this with you. When we talk about it in the Trumpocalypse, the surveillance state.
Yes, the total surveillance state, and yeah.
But you brought something up that's really critical. First of all, we have a Constitution, as you know, and many of your viewers know, which says that we have a right to privacy. That's what our Constitution says. We have the right from unreasonable search and seizure.
Right.
That includes electronic search.
Fourth Amendment, right.
Right. And we have many other rights, like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, whatever. Mm-hmm. But the reality is those rights have been overruled by the elite. Mm-hmm. And not only, like right now, just in this room, there's three of us have cell phones. All three of these cell phones are recording now what's called metadata. So they're in a record mode. Mm-hmm. That laptop is in a record mode.
Yeah, the iPad there
is in a record mode. Mm-hmm. And if there were other people in other rooms, if you happen to have, which you don't, a television, a flat screen television, that is recording.
Yeah.
So everybody with a 50-inch, HD flat screen or 20.
Disclaimer from, was it Samsung, I guess
Exactly.
it was last year, said if you don't want us to record what you're saying, don't say anything within range of the television that you don't want recorded and transmitted.
And not only if it's audio, it's video.
Right.
So you could be sitting in their underwear doing God knows what, right in front, and it's being recorded. Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, we volunteered for this.
Exactly, right.
We volunteered for this because it's convenient. It's convenient to say, Alexa, buy me some cookies. And boom, they show up at your house. Boy, that's convenient. It's convenient to be able to push a button and say, OnStar, I've just had an accident. Say, okay, there's a security feature. I get that. Okay, it's nice that my wife has, this cell phone with her in case something happens. She can summon help immediately. But the flip side of that is that we are being observed all the time, and the NSA, and other spy agencies are taking advantage of this, and we volunteered for it because it makes our lives so much more convenient. How will this? You talk about something called the world brain, an H.G. Wells concept, Troy. What is that all about? How does this fit into this prophesied one world government that we're headed towards?
Well, I mean, all these technologies that they're getting us used to, that the kids are just like massively addicted to now, is
kids. I'm 55. I'm never anywhere with that.
That's true. They've all sort of programmed us, to love these technologies.
Yes.
But what the Bible tells us is that there will be a mark of a beast. And without this, you won't be able to buy or sell. You won't be able to participate in the economic system. You won't be able to buy food. You won't be able to earn money. And so, all these technologies are getting us used to this, so that eventually, they're already beginning to roll out these microchip implants for workers worldwide. They're taking the RFID chip in their hands.
Because I can go to the snack machine in the lunchroom and just go and get my chips.
And people think it's cool,
Yeah.
And they're selling it on the cool factor. You get electronic tattoos with these, these programming in them. And they're even developing chips, Elon Musk is developing the neural lace, which will link your brain to the internet. And he's like, saying that.
What could possibly go wrong with that?
Yeah, exactly. That's Huxley talked about the world brain, but but we see it unfolding right now. And it's all predicted in the Bible.
Huh. Well, and I guess go ahead, Paul. And I got one question here as we head towards the close.
Yeah, just that computer brain interface and your humorous thing. What could go wrong with that? I mean,
you're sending, but you're also receiving.
Exactly.
Yeah. Just the idea that somebody could send signals into the neural lace connected to my brain, which
they can.
You're right.
Yeah,
sure.
And they've been doing it for 20 years. Question is, how do you know your thoughts are your own, or they aren't being subtly influenced?
Exactly. And that's already happening, just because the way search engines shape our perception of reality. You do a search for a piece of information, and that information is curated and served up in a form that fits the algorithm of those who develop it, and the worldview of those who develop the algorithm behind Google, Bing, Yahoo, not necessarily the same worldview that we share. But isn't it interesting that in a film like Transcendence, the Johnny Depp film from a couple of years ago, where he plays the man who's killed by religious wacko who wants to stop this development of an artificial intelligence, is uploaded into a mainframe, becomes godlike with his abilities, and actually fulfills the apocalyptic prophecies of those who are trying to stop what he's doing, and creates, starts performing miracles, virtual miracles, healing people of these critical diseases and injuries, and enhancing them so that they're able to carry, a guy's carrying an I-beam on one shoulder, and it's miraculous, it's wonderful, but they're also being hived, networked into his mind and becoming his very Borg-like, to refer to the Star Trek hive mind people. Yeah, people who are maybe individuals, but they're all networked. Their minds are not their own. So even though he fulfills the dire warnings of these religious wackos in the film, it's the religious wackos, even though they were right, are the ones portrayed as evil. That's the message that Hollywood sends out to our kids.
Yeah, right.
Well, I guess the question and leading, because we could go on, about this for hours, and I'm sure we will over dinner tonight, but how does the election of Donald Trump and his America First, Make America Great Again, his message, his candidacy, his presidency, what is the relevance there to this prophetic picture that the Bible paints for us, Troy?
One central thing we talk about in the book is that, obviously, both the Babylon Code and Trumpocalypse, 150 different interviews with experts on the, faith side and the secular side are the faith leaders are concerned we're heading towards the events predicted in the Bible. Secular leaders are concerned, we're heading towards the end of human civilization. And we have, threats of nuclear war going on, increase of earthquakes and hurricanes and fires and you name it, pestilence, famine, all these things, appear, but we're in an acceleration towards these events. So, in the Bible, it talks about, that God calls us to repent of our sins and to turn back to God. And so the last chapter of the book, calls on the president to call for a national day of repentance. And the last one we had was when Abraham Lincoln was president. And a friend of ours who has a ministry, he's working with members of Congress on a congressional resolution that would call for a National Day of Repentance. And the 155th anniversary of when Lincoln did this at the height of the Civil War is coming up on March 30th. So we're asking the president to do this, and we believe this would be very, very important for our nation. Given all the threats of nuclear war, all the other things that might unfold, in the coming months and years, to turn back to God and repent of our many sins that this our country collectively has committed.
So we're getting a bit of a reprieve here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And because God is giving us a reprieve, we have a responsibility before God to repent, seek His face, and do what He's asking us to do. Occupy until He comes. Because God didn't call us to occupy after He comes, but before He comes.
There are some Christians who I think, may have seen the election of Donald Trump as a means to an end, which is, taking America back, maybe translating "Make America Great Again" as, Make America Christian again. Given that the Bible tells us that there is this global government coming, that there will arise an Antichrist at some point, what then does this Trump presidency look like? I mean, are we actually going to turn things in the other direction, or again, is this just a sort of a stopgap, a window of opportunity before things really? Before basically God pulls out the restrainer and allows the enemy to have its way?
Well, I think because America is not specifically mentioned in the Bible. I mean, people can make reference to it, but it's not specifically mentioned in the Bible. We really don't know. Therefore, it would be a serious thing before God, a serious error to make, to superimpose our own prejudices about what's going to happen to America's future. Okay? So what we should be doing, rather than pretending to know what God is going to do, we should be faithful and occupy until he comes. We should be busy about our Father's business, winning souls, making disciples of all nations. See, we're in the posture of being faithful, coming against evil. If we're busy doing what God has required us to do, then we leave the results up to him. If our nation at some point flips and God's people have done everything they can, at least we know we've done everything we could, and then we trust God to deliver us and lead us. But we certainly can't assume to know God's will by taking Bible verses out of context and then do nothing and give our nation over to the hands of the evil one. I personally think God has a plan for America, but it's contingent upon God's people repenting.
Troy, what do you hope people take away from the book Trumpocalypse?
Yeah, building on what Paul just said here, a lot of people, maybe, Christians especially, may have sort of a sense of fatalism, that they see all these things unfolding and they just sort of throw up their hands and say, well, it's all going to come down in the next, few years or something. So what am I going to do? I'm just going to sort of wait until we get raptured or whatever happens, But, who knows what's going to happen? I think one of the messages we put in this book is that the choice is ours. As believers, we should be doing everything we can to, tell other people about the Lord, live righteous lives, pray for our country, pray for our president, fast. We're in the greatest battle in history that's going on, spiritual and politically and faith-wise and pretty much in every aspect. So there's a lot of work to do. And, maybe we'll get decades. Maybe there's like another century left. There's still a lot of work before the gospel's taken throughout all the world. Jesus said the gospel will be preached to all the world and then the end will come. And there's still billions of people that haven't heard the gospel. So we have a lot of work to do to fulfill the Great Commission. And, it seems like whenever America is at its lowest point, the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, Great Depression, World War II, Americans sort of pull themselves up by their bootstraps and they get busy, to get to work, and they do the right thing. And so that's what we're hoping with this book, is that we'll wake up the church, we'll wake up people, and, essentially we'll do the right thing and turn back to God.
So not just a political book, but one that looks at it through a biblical lens. Well, just like Paul said, it's we're not wrestling against human opponents, but against principalities and powers and rulers of spiritual darkness. And
right.
The authors of the book, Trumpocalypse, The End Times President, A Battle Against the Globalist Elite and the Countdown to Armageddon, Troy Anderson and Paul McGuire. The book available January 2nd, and since I'm going to post this right around New Year's Eve, you hopefully will get a chance to see this and be one of the first to get your copy. Trumpocalypse, again, watch for them on Skywatch TV later in January, and gentlemen, it just really enjoyed the conversation. Looking forward to more of that over dinner tonight, because every time we get together, it's and not often enough, but it's fascinating stuff. Safe travels back home, and again, we thank you for making the trip out here. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
Likewise, thank you.
Hope you did as well. We're going to put links to their websites, both of their websites, in the show notes. You'll find those at vftb.net, or if you're watching this on video, which is youtube.com/derek-gilbert, you just look in the notes below the video. You'll find that there. So I'm going to truncate the end comments I normally put on these so that I minimize the amount of video editing I do. I don't like doing video editing. I do it because I have to, but I don't like doing it. So we're going to do this in just one take and see if we can make this work. So we'll conclude just by pointing out that View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House, released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. The opening theme is by Kevin MacLeod. His website is incompetech.com. The opening announcer, D.C. Good. Remember, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.